Hello, guys. Um, Thank you all for being here this late on the last day of DefCamp. It's great to see you again. Some of you have been here at my previous presentations. My startup is called DefCamp. It's titled Lions at the Watering Hole because there are a few similarities in types of attack my startup detects with the watering hole and the predators in the real life. I'm a cybersecurity researcher. I wrote my first antivirus in 1992 years old, kind of old. I'm a private security consultant, but also I'm a consultant for the Romanian National CERT. And last year, exactly 1 year ago, well, in October 2018, I founded my company, and it became a part of Orange Fab Accelerator as soon as I founded it. It was in stealth mode, not going public. This is what stealth mode means, from October 2018 until May 2019. Right now, I will present you 1 year of activity of the DefCamp. The scope of the DefCamp is to find methods of detecting previously unknown browser attacks, including watering hole, drive-by exploitation, client-side exploitation, or cryptojacking in legitimate websites, but in a proactive way, before the attack actually happens. Browser attacks are the most elusive and hard to detect types of attacks, and this fact is only because of some HTTP particularities. One of them is the fact that the HTTP was standardized as a protocol over a period of 4 years, starting 1995 to 1999. But the problem is that the first browser actually appeared in 1990s. Some of them appeared a little bit later. There were a plethora of browsers back then. Internet Explorer appeared in 1995, and you can imagine that not being a correlated, a unified standard to implement HTTP, everybody implemented more or less their own versions of HTTP, which later became unified in a standard. The problem is that browser engines already had their core developed, and they didn't want to adhere to a single standard. So basically, this is why one website looks different on Firefox and Internet Explorer or Chrome, or why cross-site scripting only works on Internet Explorer and doesn't work on any other browsers. Because every browser decided to implement its own vision of HTTP. The other problem is the fact that HTTP is a very complex protocol, and it basically reunites a sum of other protocols. And these points create a weird situation in where there are certain gray areas which are interpreted differently by different browsers, which are interpreted differently by different firewalls or antiviruses. Another problem is the fact that in the recent years, JavaScript allowed the creation and the development of dynamic pages. This created the premises for self-modifying code. Another problem is the fact that most of nowadays communication is performed on HTTPS, and HTTPS has a feature called certificate pinning, which makes interception rather impossible. These specifics create a very fertile land for development of web attacks. These web attacks are very hard to detect, and one of the few solutions to detect a web attack is to start a client-side honeypot, an instrumented browser that visits a web page and ways to be infected or not. But this approach is very time-consuming because there are some techniques used by attackers that, for instance, only certain browsers are attacked, only browsers with certain technologies are attacked, or the fact that some malware decides to delay the execution for 1 minute or two, and if you start the sandbox analyzing that sample might never get actually analyzed because it will launch much later than the allowed time for execution. These problems generated one of the most dangerous attacks in today's security environment. It's called watering hole attack. His name is, as I already said, is derived from nature, when predators lurk in the bushes while prey comes to drink water in the savannah. Basically, it's a computer attack strategy in which the victim is a particular group or organization or an individual. And in this attack, the attacker knows, observes, or by any other means has an idea of certain websites that the target is usually visiting, and decides to use an exploit to take control of those websites and infects them with malware. Sometimes, as I said earlier, these attacks are undiscriminate. They simply attack everyone. Some other times, they look for specific IP ranges. Some other times, they look for specific technologies. Some other times, they have other specifics they are interested in before attacking a victim. These specifics make the attack very hard to analyze by researchers, because you can imagine that if the attacker wants to target specific IP addresses and researcher uses a different IP address, maybe for sure he will never get infected. This fact makes the analysis very, very hard. For instance, I will talk a little bit later about a very interesting attack, an attack that I independently discovered with Google Tag, which only targeted users who had Turkish language in their browser. The watering hole attack phases can be like 4 or 5 phases. The first phase is the phase where the victims are attracted to the website, either by regular browsing or by spear phishing or any other method that would get the victim to enter the website. The victim is fingerprinted, as I used to say earlier, based on IP or browser technologies, and the attacker makes a decision if they decide to attack the victim or simply let it pass and do nothing. Victims of interest are redirected to an exploitation server, where usually they host an exploit kit, which has different exploits. And in the case of not interesting victims, they are redirected to the legitimate website with no overhead and no problem, no stress. This is another representation of the browser attack anatomy. You have in the first panel, you have the multiple ways of contact, the way they attract visitors, either through a normal website hosting a malicious advertisement, as was the case with another campaign we identified and we will discuss later, the Mage Card campaign, either through a compromised website or a spammed link. The victims who get to the website by any of these methods get redirected to the exploit kit, which in turn, after exploitation, infects the victim with either ransomware, banking trojans, malware, or cryptojacking. Basically, this type of attack is impossible to blame on someone because, for instance, in case of spear phishing, you can say that the user was not careful enough. He didn't have good security practices, and he clicked a link. But in this case, you simply walk into a website which is legitimate looking, but it has been previously infected without anybody knowing. For instance, in the case of the Google of the attack discovered by Google Tag, which we will detail a little bit later, the campaign lasted for 2 years. For 2 years, everybody who entered a certain website and it had Turkish as language was infected. The idea is that the community considers web browser attacks as very dangerous, but they are not so common. My idea is that they are not so uncommon, but rather they are very hard to detect, and this is the reason why we see an increase in complex watering hole attacks in the recent years, mainly because of the fact that most of the victims don't realize they have been compromised. There is no obvious infection vector, such as in the case of spear phishing, so to say. Putting my consultant hat, I identified during my investigations, forensic investigations, like 7 out of 10 cases where watering hole was used as the initial attack vector. Yet, this type of attack is not as known as it should be. Most of the time, the victims had state-of-the-art security in place. There were no average Joes. Most of them were either security professionals, journalists, politicians, people working in the intelligence community, etc. And the reason why these people could have been infected in the first place is the fact that this attack is very hard to identify on the fly. Most of the solutions existing there already employing traditional detection methods simply try to simply try to catch the aftermath of the exploitation when the exploitation kit server tries to exploit the browser, or a later phase when the attacker tries to contact the command and control server in order to give access to the attacker. The problem is that in case of exploits, most of the times are used zero-day exploits, which means there are no signatures to be triggered. And in the case of command and control server, most of the times there are legitimate websites used as command and control, or simply fresh new IP addresses that haven't been involved in any type of illegal activities in the past. So basically, if you have a threat intel feed and it's up to date, you still can be attacked by, you still can be a victim of this type of attack. I will have a few titles from the news to just to understand the damage that was done and the victims, the magnitude of this type of attack, we can see that Apple confirmed being hit in a recent watering hole attack. If you see, it's from 2013. iOS developer site at core of Facebook Apple was hit by a watering hole attack. Chinese attackers hacked Forbes website in watering hole attack. The victims were in financial services or defense industry or intelligence community or even diplomats. Try to imagine the number of people visiting Forbes website. Try to imagine that what kind of people visit Forbes website. These people had been attacked and had been targeted by unknown APT group in order to be compromised. This news is from 2015. We see here that this is the same news with watering hole that attacked Facebook, Twitter, and Apple. You can imagine that all of these, Facebook, Twitter, Apple, Google, Microsoft, all other victims had really tight security in place. But the problem is that this type of attack doesn't focus on attacking the server directly or the infrastructure directly, but instead attacks the employees. And employees have a lot of access. If you know which employees to attack, basically you have the key to the kingdom. In the case of the site that was used in the attack that compromised Facebook, Apple, and Twitter guys, it was an iOS developer forum. It was a very esteemed forum. A lot of people were joining that forum regularly with different problems and helping others with solutions. It was a very skilled and quantitative community. The attackers knew exactly what they wanted when they decided to compromise that forum. In 2017, it happened in 2016, late 2016, but the news appeared in 2017. We have banks around the world targeted in watering hole attacks. This story is very interesting because the actual attack had been identified by pure luck, as it's the case with most of these attacks detected in the wild. Like 30 banks in Poland, and more than 300 employees had been compromised through malware planted in Polish Financial Supervision Authority. This Financial Supervision Authority was giving regular updates for the banking community. They were regularly browsing that page. More than 300 people had been compromised, but the attack was discovered by a guy who used to run all his stuff in a virtual machine that was monitored permanently, and he realized the second day he got to the job, he realized that his virtual machine performed some activities in the previous night at 2 a.m. And he decided to let his boss know, and they contracted the security company, which performed the forensics investigation. With the extracted indicators of compromise, they managed to identify not only the 30 banks in Poland, but also banks all over the world, including Mexico, including Portugal, France, or Germany. We have another news, how watering hole attacks target the financial sector and government agencies. Just to understand the type of the targets most of these attackers are looking for. We have another example of a Trojan that was planted in a news website and simply attacked everybody who visited that website, totally indiscriminate. We have here the content of the article that appeared based on this incident. It's I put it here just to point the fact that all the victims had been attacked, not only government people or intelligence community. You don't have to be special to be a target. The main purpose of the attackers is not only to steal informations or get access, but also to mine cryptocurrencies on your device, or even steal your crypto wallet, or steal your credit card, etc. We have here, this is very recent, it's from 2 months ago. It's linked to the attack that and the campaign we also discovered. Sorry, what did I do? Okay. DIO's watering hole vulnerability. Google's Project Zero team of security experts proactively search previously unknown vulnerabilities. The internal threat analysis group found a website, and then they extrapolated and found many more that was targeting a particular minority in China. I'm not saying it was the Chinese government or anything. I'm just saying they targeted that particular minority or ethnic group. The idea is that they used an iOS 0 day. iOS 0 days usually have been considered as something only available and that can only be used by state-sponsored attackers. This is not exclusive. Cyber criminal groups have access to this type of resources as well. What is very interesting is the fact that the last paragraph we have here is, given the exploit chains in place, researchers estimated that sites have been quietly hacking visitors with Apple devices for as much as 2 years. For 2 years, that certain website was attacking its users and nobody noticed. You can imagine that at least a part of those users had antiviruses. At least a part of those users were coming from a corporate network, and they were protected by firewalls. Nobody discovered this attack until Google did, and the DefCamp in parallel. Another title, as you can see, the date is from 30 of August 2019, like two months ago. We have a report from Kaspersky, which identified one known APT group using a Chrome zero-day exploit. How many of you use Chrome for web browsing? Okay, I use Chrome too. So basically, if you entered a certain Korean news site, you would have been exploited, and you would have had no idea that your device had been compromised. We have another title: over 18,000 websites infested with MageCard card skimming malware. We see here that MageCard attacked British Airways, Newegg, Ticketmaster, Baseball Hall of Fame, a lot of places which are very interesting from the point of view of cyber criminal, places where people actually have credit cards. They don't focus only on high-profile websites. They also compromise small shops. We actually caught a shop in UK, not very big, which was implanted with Mage cards tools, so to say. As you can see, the victims are from Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Twitter, Forbes, countless banks, telecommunication companies, intelligence services, military, etc., even a candy maker. Why would you hack a candy maker? But, okay. In most of the cases, the result of these attacks are the full compromise of the device. In 99% of the cases, they use zero-day vulnerabilities. So basically, you're totally unprotected because that vulnerability wasn't known at the moment the attack happened. There was no signature for it. There was no IOCs. There was nothing. So basically, you could have had no idea that someone was going to attack you. As Anup Ghosh said, he's the CEO and founder of INFOSEC company. They were involved in watering hole incident analysis. How can we train employees to be wary of watering hole sites? It doesn't make any sense, and I can just see why some CISOs are getting frustrated. At least, as I was saying earlier, with spear phishing, you can blame the user, even if it's not their fault. With watering holes, they can always say, I had to go there for work. I mean, imagine the case with the Polish banks. Those people who were attacked, who became victims, visited the governmental site of Polish Financial Supervision Authority. They had to do that for their work. And they became victims by doing that. You can't blame them. Why does this happen, though? The current situation is that traditional detection mechanisms either fail to detect the attacks or they are too time-consuming to be feasible. Starting with 2015, 2016, there was a need to extrapolate, so to say, the signatures of or the footprints of the attacks, as traditional signature scanning was insufficient. So machine learning was used to classify HTML elements as suspicious or not suspicious. A few engines emerged, one from Google, one from Kaspersky, one from DefCamp, us, one from Bitdefender. Maybe there are some others, but I don't know of them. The only difference between the DefCamp and these other engines is the fact that the DefCamp is not private. The DefCamp is not reserved to a few select number of researchers who can identify a watering hole and just let it be for a period of time just to perform their analysis. The DefCamp is accessible to anyone who is interested in knowing the websites he visits, who needs to know if a certain website will attack him before he actually visits the website. Our detection approach, as I was saying earlier, is based on machine learning. We classify HTML elements as suspicious or benign. How did we compile the data set? We have a data set of 40 plus features. They totally describe malicious HTML element. Amongst these features, but not limited to this, there are common instructions using malware, some specific code constructions which are used in malware and not in normal HTML elements or JavaScript, programming styles, and relations amongst all these together basically give you an exact idea if the HTML element you are analyzing is suspicious or is safe. We trained the machine learning engine using a sample of 30,000 HTML elements, and we tested the machine learning algorithm with the remaining 10,000 elements. Um, we had very, very low false positives. We had no false negatives. The false positives were generated by the fact that some website programmers, for reasons beyond me, decide to use malware coding techniques and styles in order to perform legitimate activities. But even if this happens, the KNS machine learning algorithm is backed by a series of sandboxes who work in parallel. One of the sandboxes is based on Node.js, so basically it tries to interpret the actual JavaScript. The other one is a high interactivity client-side honeypot. It's basically various browsers are launched on the suspect website, and they try to understand what is happening, if the website is actually attacking or not. The results of the machine learning by one hand and the sandboxes by the other hand are compared, and if they are coherent, the report is generated. If they are not coherent, and there are some discrepancies between them, that suspicious HTML element is forwarded to a human analyst who can decide if the respective script is something malicious or not. And according to the results of the analysis, the machine learning algorithm is retrained according to the new environment. The KNS was founded in October 2018, as I was saying earlier. And during this 1 year period, we scanned a number of 6,000 websites. Amongst these, there were like 740 crypto-checking websites, websites that would perform mining activities in their visitors' browsers without the users knowing this. We found 3 cybercriminal groups and 2 APT groups, possibly nation-state. I don't know, I don't do attribution. So, the first case study is called One Website in Southeast Asia. We have here the actual report from Project Zero. They explained that that website was attacking the user using one iPhone 0 day. In fact, there were more iPhone 0 days, Android 0 days, and Windows Internet Explorer 0 days. They also say there was no target discrimination, but as you will see, they were only focused on a certain language-speaking group of people. So it happened back in February or January 2018. One of our users browsed the website in Southeast Asia. Doesn't matter which country, but we all know which country it is. One particular JavaScript triggered the DefCamp engine. So basically, I tried to analyze that the JavaScript because it wasn't quite normal to see that type of activity. When we analyzed the JavaScript, we realized it was jQuery. jQuery is a very known and widespread JavaScript library. But at the end of the library, there was this little code. This code here looks totally weird because it's hex encoded. No signature scanning could see anything wrong with this piece of code. But we actually managed to trigger a few features. We actually saw that the code was obfuscated. We saw that hexadecimal right was used. Also, we saw that hexadecimal right was used in abundance. There was a lot of hexadecimal characters. We also saw the window operator, which is one of our features. We saw that the script was trying to fingerprint the users. As you see, there is a navigator right at the beginning of the script. The navigator tag basically contains the language of the browser. So they were focused on a certain group of people speaking a certain language. We also noticed that they were some large and awkward-looking variables used there. So after deobfuscating and executing the suspicious JavaScript, we managed to get to this form. This form, which we see clearly now that they check for a certain language, and if that language is that condition is met, they simply create a new sorry, a new script in the DOM, and that script gets redirected to something that looks like the BEEF framework. Everybody knows the BEEF framework. Okay. The only difference is that the BEEF framework wasn't serving the regular exploits, which are known by everybody, but they had an iPhone exploit. When I began analyzing the payload of the exploit, I realized it might have been unknown at the moment of my analysis. I started to ask some friends if they know something about this, and they told me that Google Threat Analysis Group is already monitoring that website and a few others. And as a result, I decided to keep my findings private. Basically, another interesting case we had in the past year was an encounter with MageCart. This happened while one of our users browsed an online shop in the United Kingdom. It was a rather small shop with something like a few thousand visitors per day, but still it was deemed as a good target for the attackers. One particular script included from remote resources triggered the KNAS machine learning engine. The remote resource had a hostname similar to a legitimate content delivery in order to mask their presence in the HTML page for the unwittingly eyes. Further analysis on the remotely included script revealed a few interesting aspects. That the script was collecting credit card information, which we already assumed. But the interesting part was that unlike other MageCart campaigns we encountered, they actually used exploits from a public exploit repository to attack the visitors. So they were using not 0 days, but rather known recent exploits. And the most interesting fact was that the server was located in Romania. At this moment, I removed my DKNAS hat and put my CERT hat on. We get in contact with the Romanian police, and we provided them with all our findings, and they performed the takedown for the command and control server. And we are currently investigating, and it will be concluded in a report. This was my presentation. Thank you very much for being here. I hope I didn't bore you very hard. And I don't know if you have any questions or...
I mean...
Any other questions?
You don't need a microphone, do you?
My voice is very powerful, yeah, I know. You mentioned something about the sandboxing earlier I think it was like two-thirds into your presentation. I was curious, the sandbox honeypot, right?
Yeah.
So do you emulate any specific browser in that sandbox or multiple browsers? How does that work?
I try to emulate Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Chrome in this order. I never emulate links or something from text mode Windows.
So Internet Explorer, like latest version, because I'm asking in the context of only certain types of browsers can be exploited with different types of exploits, right?
I'm using Internet Explorer 7 and Internet Explorer 8.
Oh, okay.
Not very old, but not very recent either.
And just to follow up, sorry, just as a follow up, and do they trigger like just browser exploits or also PDF, Java, and?
If they are through the web, they also get triggered through.
So it's also like PDF exploits, Java exploits?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. How are you, in your opinion, the best method or the good methods to protect against this type of attacks or to mitigate the risk? Maybe on DNS filtering or something like this?
The best method is to be able to parse the page and understand that there is a malware or not. Unfortunately, except the DefCamp, I don't know of any other public solutions that does this. All similar projects are used internally by Google, Facebook possibly, or Kaspersky to further their own analysis, but they don't give this as a service to the public. Because most of the times you find 0 days, and these 0 days are very juicy information, then they are deemed too important to be made public until it's not too late.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There was one more question here.
Hi. Thanks
Hi.
for the presentation.
Thank you.
My question is, how does this technology work? Is it like a client side you install in your, is it like a browser plugin? Is it a client app that you installed on, or do you have to input an URL and then get the report like any sandbox? Because, and I'm asking this because you said like one of our customers visited a website and this triggered something. Is it an on-premise web filtering solution? How does it work?
Yeah, I have a few approaches. One of them, and the easiest, is to list your websites in the DefCamp and tell the DefCamp to perform either weekly, daily, or monthly scans on the websites. I also have a few products who integrate the DefCamp engine so that you don't have to type the websites manually, but when you browse a certain website, it gets analyzed by the DefCamp on the fly. This is a virtual appliance, but also hardware appliance.
Okay, yeah, I was asking because this issue of particularly malvertising, for example, it makes it hard to know a particular website that I'm going to visit, right? Any legitimate malvertising, and through supply chain attacks or third-party script attacks, right? If I use an analytics service as a website owner, I use an analytics service, and that analytics service gets compromised, and they inject the script into my website that way. I mean, as a visitor, I have no idea what website I'm going to visit tomorrow, right? So any of them could get some malicious advertisement or an injected script through a third-party service providers.
Well, the idea, the methodology we use is to follow all the JavaScripts and all the remotely included resources. And when we present the report, we show the script that we suspect is malicious. Also, the remote resource from where this JavaScript was included, and also the page in the website that you visited where this JavaScript was included. Thank you very much.
There was one more question at the back.
Okay. Hello, cool
Hello.
presentation. This is the first time for me hearing about this type of attack. So you said the KNS is not a private tool, so is it available for your everyday person?
Yeah, it's thecanals.com.
Okay, and iOS came into discussion multiple times. Would you say they have more flaws than, for example, Android or?
No, 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 no. Both iOS and Android are just as vulnerable. The only difference is that Android being sort of open source, because it's not fully open source, it's under much more scrutiny. Usually, people who find the 0 days in iPhones rather have them sold to different companies who are interested. The price for a full exploitation chain on iOS, for instance, can reach up to $4 million. And you can imagine people would rather keep this private than make it public. But in the past years, there were no to none iOS 0-day vulnerabilities exploited in the wild, and there were very, very few iOS vulnerabilities that were patched and identified by security teams.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, we had more questions.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to ask, is it possible that an attacker, for instance, can create an exploit that's specifically bypass DKNS? Is it the detection local or remote?
The idea is that a malware or an exploit, to be an exploit, has to have certain features. For instance, in case of Java exploits, you have to perform some sort of heap spraying. There are certain features. I cannot get in very much detail in this because trade secrets, but there are certain features that make a malware or an exploit to be a malware or an exploit. And we identified at least some of those features, and we monitor for those features. That's why we don't have very much false negatives. We have almost non-zero false negative because basically a malware, this type of malware has to, first of all, redirect the user, has to fingerprint the user so they know which they are attacking. They need to perform some sort of code of obfuscation to conceal their intentions against antiviruses, etc., and some other things. All these things combined gave us the information that that JavaScript is a malware. This is why I said earlier that some of the false positives I had came from the fact that some legitimate code developers used malware techniques for their JavaScripts. They didn't drop anything. They were not actual implants redirecting to unknown resources. It was everything cool, and this is how they decided to implement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
The idea of these attacks is not to go into the network and start pulling data through the network, correct?
Yeah.
So in the event that you don't have administrative permissions on that specific computer, it is reliant on the user who logs in for their data to be transmitted out?
Usually these attacks happen with the user's personal devices. The personal device is much less secure than a work computer, but people reuse passwords. People sometimes use their personal devices to join the corporate network, or sometimes they have very lax security on corporate devices because they are very confident in the $1 million security products they buy. I have seen a few banks which had like $1 million security measures in place, and they were still compromised with watering holes. This is only because the fact that the watering hole is not targeting the network, but rather the human resource.
So it's literally reliant on that user doing something where their information will be going out to the attacker, not necessarily coming into the machine.
No, they actually use an exploit to gain full control on the machine. It's zero clicks, zero user interactivity. You basically don't have to click anything. You just browse the website, visit the website, and you are getting compromised.
Thank you very much, Andrei.
Thank you
For this awesome presentation.
Thank you very much.